Mhm. Okay, I believe we are live here. Hello, everybody, and greeting from Wexford, Ireland. My name is Colin R. Turner, and this is kind of a sort of a last-minute impromptu live stream because I have a very exciting person to talk to today. And if you watch the video of mine from months ago, which was making a computer simulation of capitalism, then maybe you'll appreciate what my guest is going to speak about and his ideas. In fact, I think it was through that video that I made contact with Eric Schechter. So I'd like to introduce you to Eric Schechter, who is actually a retired professor from Vanderbilt University. Welcome, Eric. How are you doing?
Fine. How are you?
I'm great. I'm really happy to be talking to you, Eric, because you've touched on something that's something I'm very passionate about, and something that is quite heretical, I suppose, in the modern sense. You know, we're what you and I have in common is that we challenge something that is so utterly embedded in our culture that almost no one dares to defy it. And of course, we're talking about trade. We're talking about ordinary, everyday trading, which is
private property.
Yes, exactly, and everything that falls out from that. Now, you know as well as I do that most people who call for an end of capitalism or who want to see big change in the world, they almost always, without exception, they still want to include trade of some kind in that equation. So whether
they have a wide variety of meanings of what they mean by the word capitalism.
Absolutely, yes, of course, that's open for debate as well. But I just wanted to say that most of these sort of change advocates that I deal with maybe on a daily basis, they still see no problem with trade and cannot make the connection between trade or fair trade, free market trading, and capitalism and all the problems that go with that. So I'd love to hear your a summary of your analysis of how trade equals inequality. And later then we can discuss the work of maybe Bruce Boghosian, who's another mathematician who's also done something similar. But I'd love to hear your version of it first. You wrote an essay and a video on this, isn't that right?
Yes. But I wouldn't say it's free trade. It's just any kind of trade. Maybe it applies more to free trade, except that the people who what this would apply to wouldn't need to mention the word free in there. You don't have to emphasize that so much. It's just any kind of trade. It starts from the concept of utility, which is how useful is something to you. I mean, Karl Marx made a distinction between the use value and exchange value of something you could be exchanging. And I guess I'm not going quite along with the way he set things up, but I can't describe his way in detail. I haven't really studied Marx, I just have a hint of it. But the fact that something may be of different usefulness to you or to me, that's part of the reason that we might have an exchange, why somebody might sell something. If, for instance, if I have a bicycle sitting in my garage and I'm not using it, it's just taking up space, I'd be better off without it because then I'd have the space. Maybe you want a bicycle, and this thing is good as one that you could buy for $300 in a bicycle shop. So if you can buy this bicycle from me for less than $300, you'd be coming out ahead. I mean, figure if you could get it at a bicycle shop for $300, and if I sell it to you for $200, you've made a profit of $100. On the other hand, to me, it's not worth anything. So if I sell it to you for $200, I've made a profit of $200. So I've made more profit than you have. Now, how did we come to that price of $200? Well, actually, we could have agreed on some other price. If I sold it to you for $50, you'd be making a profit of $250, and I'd be making a profit of $50. We'd still both be profiting. As long as the bicycle is worth more to you than to me, we can both make a profit by my selling you the bicycle at any price that's between what it's worth to me and what it's worth to you. But it's not likely that we're going to make the same profit. That's only going to happen by coincidence. That'll happen if we choose a selling price that's exactly halfway between what it's worth to me and what it's worth to you. And that's not likely to happen because I'm not going to tell you what it's worth to me, and you're not going to tell me what it's worth to you, because we would both like to get more of a profit. So what determines how much of a profit, how the profit is split up? I mean, the total profit is the same. The difference between what it's worth to me and what it's worth to you, you can figure that as a constant. But if you change the selling price, the total profit is still the same, but we're changing how it's divided between your profit and my profit. So what determines that? Well, it's determined by which one of us is in the better bargaining position. Like, if I really, really need $50 desperately for some reason, then I might be willing to sell it to you for $50. On the other hand, if I've got money in my wallet and I'm not in any hurry about selling the bicycle, then I might hold out for $250 for the price. And you've got the same kind of considerations. If you really, really need a bicycle right away, you might buy it for a higher price just to get it. If you're not in a hurry, if there's some other bicycles you have your eye on, you might wait for me to offer you a lower price. So which way the price goes depends on which one of us is in the better bargaining position. Now, whoever is in the better bargaining position is probably going to get more of the profit, and that puts them into an even better bargaining position for the next time they are trading something. So the guy who's in the better bargaining position now is an even still better bargaining position next time. So trade increases inequality.
Fantastic. And I think in your video, in the video, you actually expressed it very well, that there was that the buyer had a maximum purchase ceiling, and the seller would have a minimum selling price, minimum selling floor. In other words, that the trade always takes place between the minimum selling floor and the maximum purchase ceiling, and this difference between where that trade actually happens on that scale between the minimum selling price and the maximum purchase price is where the inequality comes in, because, as you rightly say, whoever's in the stronger bargaining position can hold out for a higher profit price on that scale. So, I mean, I think the point is that even though, theoretically trade is seemingly an innocuous idea, but it's predicated on the notion that you're always trading exactly in the middle between the minimum selling price and the maximum purchase price, which of course is rarely ever the case.
Yep. And as a result, at least I think it's as a result, inequality has become enormous in our society. It tends to grow. People come up with all sorts of explanations of that, and they have complicated explanations, but I don't think you need a complicated explanation. And the growth of inequality is so universal. I mean, it's grown so huge, and it's been growing so big for so long under all circumstances that anybody can imagine, that it seems to me it's got to have a simple explanation. It's got to be something really basic, something built into the most basic parts of our economic system. So they don't need subtle explanations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think in the computer model that I did, I was suggesting that it's slightly different from what you were proposing. In that model, there was it was like a simulation where you would trade with random agents each time. And even though all the agents started off with the exact same amount of wealth at the beginning, some did have a slight advantage in terms of a skill level, which could equate to any sort of advantage in the trade. So anyone, like, for example, who's better at selling things, or anyone who has more things to sell, there's always. I mean, I think it's it's a fact that some people just are better at making money than others, or better at trading than others, and some people have more things to trade, have better skills, blah blah blah. So in that model, then the idea was that even though everyone starts the same, that when you just introduce this tiny variance between agents and let them all trade at random, then eventually more and more money gravitates to one or more people, and everyone else basically sinks down to the bottom. And I think that what surprised me about the essay that you wrote and the video that you did was that actually it didn't even have any of that prior advantage attached to it. So it was basically everyone was 100% equal at the beginning. There was no one with any trading advantage or in that.
No, that's not true. I was saying that one trader might be in a stronger bargaining position than the other, and that would be because of the advantages that they have.
Yes, exactly. But theoretically, I suppose from a starting point of view, you could say that everyone starts exactly the same, which is similar to what Bruce Boghosian was proposing in this article that was featured in Pacific American. I know you've read that article, because I think maybe you introduced me to that. And his ideas were also very similar. And he is a very accomplished mathematician, as I'm sure yourself are. But he was giving a very elaborate proof that basically, even if you have a society of people literally just tossing coins for wealth, where you gain or you lose wealth according to the flip of a coin, that even that on its own produces oligarchical structures in society. What did you think of Bruce Boghosian's work and that article? Did you like that? Did you agree with it?
Oh yeah, and I'm looking forward to his TED Talk, which will be less technical, but will present some of the same ideas. I'm not sure what's the holdup. He's already made the TED Talk, but it's already been recorded, but for some reason it hasn't been put online yet, and he's been wondering why as well, why the TED people haven't put it up. So I hope they will put it up soon.
That would be fantastic to see. That would be really good to see. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what you were saying about people starting off equal. What's going to happen there is, if people start off equal, there will be slight fluctuations. Just random chance is going to cause some people to go up and some people to go down. But these mathematical properties that Bruce and I have studied mean that once there's a little bit of deviation, it can start getting bigger. A little bit of inequality can cause more inequality. And so, and of course, there's no way it was going to stay at perfectly equal. So it grows.
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course. Maybe in the model that I propose, you could say that it is that, agents entering that model have already sort of gained a sort of advantage going into it there. Yeah. So, but I saw the lecture by Bruce Boghosian actually in the Collège de France the other day. I think you sent me the link to that, and that was really quite involved and pretty maths heavy lecture. But I managed to get through it more or less, and even though a lot of the maths went over my head, I did really grasp the basic principles of what he was proposing. I'll put a link to that lecture actually underneath the video afterwards. But what did you think of that lecture? Did you watch it all as well?
Yes, and it was interesting. One of the things I liked best was, because he was doing everything very precisely, taking a very specific mathematical model, he was able to work out very specific consequences of it and prove mathematical theorems about it. And one of the things he was able to study was, he came up with a precise definition of oligarchic society or oligarchic economy. What he pointed out was, if you take what's called the Lorenz curve, what this is it shows what percentage of the people have what percentage of the wealth in a society. And so if you look at the left end of the Lorenz curve, it's not very steep, it's very gradual. And what that means is, it takes a lot of people just to get a little bit of wealth. If you look at the right end of the curve, it's a very steep curve, because if you take just a few more people, you get a lot more wealth, because the right end of the curve is where you've got the richer people, and they've got a much higher concentration of the wealth. And then at the very far right of the curve, at least in some societies, what you've got is when the curve hits the right end of the box that the curve is in some societies, when it hits the right end of the curve, well, no, the curve hits the right end of the box, it's also hitting the top of the box. That is, the curve goes to the upper right corner of the box directly. But there are other societies where the curve hits somewhere in the middle of the right side of the box, and then it shoots straight up. Instead of being a curve, it just changes to a straight line that's going along the right end of the box. And what that means is that there's just a handful of people who have a great big wad of wealth. A few of the people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. You've got a few of those people in your society, and so the wealth suddenly shoots straight up when you get to those people. And so there is a mathematical formulation of that. And if you have that kind of thing where it hits the right end of the box, the curve hits the right end of the box before going to the top of the box, he calls that an oligarchic society, and he's got mathematical formulas about it.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it's really exciting to have this kind of that sort of the weight of the mathematics onto a subject which is a lot of people kind of intuitively know is wrong, and we intuitively know the system is rigged or that the economy is rigged. But to actually have it down in mathematics now is kind of maybe bringing us into a whole new era. Would I even venture to guess that suddenly it's now become sort of official that actually this shit isn't actually working as well as we think it is, and there's actually proof to demonstrate how it isn't working and why it isn't working, and what parameters have been exceeded, basically to bring us to where we are. So I'm really quite optimistic about that it's actually been.
That was. I think we entered that era in 2014 when two other researchers, not mathematicians, Page and Gillens and Page. I think one of them's at Princeton and the other is at Northwestern, but I'm not sure if I've got those universities right. They came up with a measurement of how much public policy and government is affected by different segments of the population. And what they found is that regardless of the election results, the rich get the public policies they want, and the rest of us don't. And the way they did this, I mean, that's been common knowledge among a lot of us for a long time. But these people proved it statistically. And the way they did that was they said, let's disregard all the intermediate steps in the decision-making process. Let's just consider the inputs and the end results. The inputs are, what do people want? And you can find that out through surveys. And the outputs are what public policies actually get enacted as laws. And they found that the rich get what they want and the rest of us don't. So they proved that we have a plutocracy. We have ruled by the rich. Even if we go through the forums of democracy, even if we have go through the motions of democracy. Now, admittedly, they were just researching. Their data was about the United States, and I think the United States has become the most capitalistic country in the world in that respect. So it may not apply quite as much to some of the other countries, but more and more countries are imitating the United States, partly because they're being forced to by the United States. But anyway, that's one aspect. Another thing is they only did this with data of a few decades. So they didn't prove that it's true for all of history. But I think it is true for all of history. If you just look at history, I mean, in the United States, we had slavery and indentured servitude and genocide and land theft. killing off the Native Americans and taking their land. Go back to those days, and that was plutocracy. It was ruled by the rich. And you go back further, look at ancient kings and how they amassed fortunes by sending out their warlords to raise taxes on everybody. And that was plutocracy. And that's been going on for thousands of years. So it's not new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly don't think it's novel that people with money have more power. I mean, that's pretty obvious at this stage. But I think that in particular, the sort of the drive that I see online of people who are questioning capitalism, questioning modern economy, I think that they really need this kind of proof, like a shot in the arm, because most people, almost everyone that I speak to, and I should be talking to people who are very much in an alternative space, but even the people I speak to, they still believe that ordinary trading is an innocuous force for good.
Even beneficial. They even believe it's beneficial because, after all, both traders profit. It's true that as long as the trading price is between what the thing is worth to the buyer and what it's worth to the seller, as long as the trading price is between that, as long as it's a voluntary trade, both traders are making a profit. So in the short run, for the individual, it is beneficial. It's just the long-term effects are horrible.
Yes, but I think it's obviously just worth pointing out at this point that obviously if to use your bicycle analogy, if you sell me your bicycle for whatever X price, I mean, it's not like if I'm going to profiting less, it doesn't mean I'm actually losing in the transaction. I mean, I'm still getting a bicycle that's useful to me. So I think your point is not that one person wins and the other person loses, but that there is a differential between the gains of either party. Yeah, so that's important to note. And one of the things actually that struck me about Bruce Boghosian's lecture on the Collège de France was that question from, I don't know if you watched the end of it, where the guy asked the questions. He asked some really, really excellent questions. And if anyone's watching that lecture, you might want to skip through some of the heavy maths part in the middle and go to the questions at the end. Because I did notice that Bruce Boghosian's body language changed entirely when this guy started giving him these kind of tough questions. And that was interesting in itself, because obviously he's fully confident in his mathematical models, and he's a bloody genius in maths as far as I'm concerned compared to me. But when he was asked these questions that were not about his maths, but about the assumptions and about how what he's talking about actually maps onto society, he seemed a little bit less confident, I thought, and a little bit, shall we say, messy in his approaches or his responses. One of the questions,
I can see why. It's because the two men were taking different approaches. Boghossian was taking it as an abstract mathematics problem where we postulate that we're going to do model trade in this fashion, and then we look at what are the consequences of that model. Whereas his host, who was asking those questions at the end, was asking instead these postulates you started from to come up with your model. Are those postulates, do they have that much to do with the real world, with how economics really works? And that's harder to come up with. I mean, there are lots of different models, and if you want any of them to be simple enough to do mathematics with them, you have to oversimplify a whole lot. For instance, my model with trade increasing inequality, I was only looking at one very narrow aspect of how economics works. And I thought it's important enough that it does affect things, but it still is leaving out all sorts of stuff. One of the things that Bruce mentioned was redistribution. If you use redistribution, you can counter this effect of trade increasing inequality. And that's true. If in addition to trade, you also had redistribution going on, constantly redistributing wealth, putting a tax on the rich and giving the resulting money to the poor in proportion to how much they deviate from the median or mean. I'm not sure which would it be, but in how much they deviate from the average amount of money, then you could slow down or even stop the effects of trade. So that would be a more complicated model. It would have more complicated mathematics. The result might be more beneficial to people.
Yeah, there were three parameters that. Sorry, I don't know why that. So it sounds very bad. There were three parameters that he added into the model later, and they were that thing you mentioned, the redistribution of wealth, also the debt and negative wealth, and there was one other one which I can't remember now. There was one other parameter that I did, and he said that when he introduced those parameters into the model, that he was able to almost create with almost perfect accuracy the current wealth distribution curve of the United States just by introducing those things. So and that is interesting, of course, in itself, because it's showing that like what you actually have to do to actually create the society the way it is, and even that society is unfair as it is, but that's actually a constrained economic model then you would have to use to do that. And if you didn't actually constrain the model at all, then the economy would be far, far more oligarchical even than it is now, probably. I think that was the supposition there. Do you?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, it was remarkable that with such a simple model, he was able to reflect the real data of the real economy so accurately.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that the guy said at the end was about was a criticism of that his mathematical model was really tantamount to describing stealing. In other words, that like if you're talking about like tossing a coin, where if we toss a coin together and you win $1 if you win, or you lose $1 if you lose. Then it was like that. His model was based on this sort of win-lose binary trading idea, which obviously is not realistic, and that's why I think I wanted to point out in your own model as well that we're not talking about one party completely losing. We're talking about this extra area of value between what it's worth to the seller and what it's worth to the buyer, and that's really important to
both parties.
Yeah, exactly. That's really important to understand. I think because I thought Bruce's model was a bit lacking in that regard at first until I really understood that we're not talking about the seller or the buyer, whoever's in the Yeah, exactly. That there's no 100% loss on anyone's part. It's just this extra bit of utility, as you say, or extra value at the top. That's what's being in contention, and that's one of the things. I didn't think Bruce actually answered that charge quite well, actually, because the other guy was the other guy was saying that model basically seems to be. I thought I would have really liked to have answered that question for Bruce, because he actually didn't answer that one very well at all, I thought. But the other question that the guy asked him at the end, which was a very good criticism as well, was that his Bruce's model obviously conserved wealth and didn't factor in growth at all, and that obviously is a mistake as well, that you would have to factor in growth if you were to successfully model the current society or the current economy. So what did you think about that? Do you think growth would make a big difference?
I'm very skeptical about how you should model growth or what it would even mean. I mean, you take, for instance, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, who are pocketing such a large portion of the growth. And what are they doing with it? If they buy another yacht, that's not really very healthy growth. Jeff Bezos I think I just recently read about Jeff Bezos spent $1 billion on one of his yachts or something like that. Maybe it was 100 million, but I mean, I think it's a waste. And on the other hand, most of the growth that we have right now is being connected with tremendous destruction to the ecosystem. and the ecosystem is not being measured for how much it's being destroyed. If we put a monetary value on the health of the ecosystem, you would find that our whole economy is not growing. It's going down very fast because the ecosystem is being destroyed. I mean, the life support system on this spaceship is being destroyed. You know, once humanity goes extinct, the economy is zilch. There's no real economy. The economy goes to zero when the last human dies. So even if you've got huge piles of gold or even huge piles of canned food, those are worthless when the last human dies. So if you kill the ecosystem, that's it for the economy, and it's not a very efficient economic system if you build up growth but you kill the economy.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think also even possibly equally or maybe more important is the idea of debt as well, and how new money is basically created through debt, as we all know. And that's probably the principal driver of growth, is basically the printing of money, you know, and no one ever likes to call it printing of money, but it fucking is. Printing money is basically what's going on by a different name. They can call it quantitative easing, or they can call it just debt, or because, you know, people getting mortgages, printing money into the economy, and that accounts probably for the large majority of the actual growth in GDP and numbers. It's just the fact that this money is just being created out of thin air. Yes.
We have a game here, a children's game in America called Musical Chairs. Maybe it goes by a different name in Ireland. I don't know. Are you familiar with that game?
Yes.
Where the people walk around while the music is playing, and then when the music stops, everybody tries to sit in a chair, and there's one less chair than there are people. And so in each round, somebody gets removed from the game, and then they take away a chair. Well, trying to pay off debt is like that, because the money is created as as interest-bearing debt. Money is not created to pay off the interest. So at any particular time, the amount of debt is less than the amount of money. And in fact, that difference keeps increasing. And also the debt, a large part of it is just things that people have invented, like, you know, people trading derivatives. Those are just, they're gambling. They're making bets on which company is going to do well and which company is going to go belly up. And so the fictional economy is gotten a lot bigger than the real economy. The economy of what's on paper is much bigger than the economy of actual houses and factories and farms and things like that.
Absolutely. And of course, let's not even get started talking about Bitcoin and the whole blockchain revolution, which is also, I think I heard a stat there recently that the Bitcoin uses as much electricity as the entire country of Argentina. I'm sure that figure is probably only increasing as well. But yeah, I mean, the point is correct that the actual economy, if you strip out all the stuff like the printing of money and the debt, I mean, you're left with something pretty pathetic, really, in the middle. I mean, I'm always saying that, you know, if everyone wants to trade, well, that's great. But if a trading economy really worked, then we would never have any such thing as debt. And the collateral damage of debt, I think, is also enormous as well, because it's not just in terms of stress on people, but also in basically stress on future generations, or people who are basically not even born yet, who are basically being born into national debt, in most countries, and into the system of taxation and inflation that's just never stopping, you know. And inflation really is actually the price of debt. I mean, I think it's really that simple, that debt creates inflation, because it's really printing free money. I mean, every economist in every first grader economist will tell you, no, you don't print money. It's very bad to print money, you know. But actually, we're fucking doing it left, right, and center all day, every one of us doing it. But we don't call it that. We call it something else. Even if the money has to be paid back, even with interest, it's still, the money is free now. So it has, like, if you borrow your $100,000, for example, even though you have to pay it back, but you also have this huge wealth that you have now with the $100,000 that you can spend on whatever it is you're spending on, and that's creating this this inflationary bubble, because it's suddenly you have all this money that you just magicked out of thin air, and that's basically causing inflation and causing the value of the dollar is basically to go down. But that seems to be something else that most other people don't seem to consider, I think.
Yeah, I have to admit that I do not understand a lot of the nuances of capitalism. Why one kind of capitalism should be better than another kind of capitalism. That's like saying, is drowning better than hanging? I just don't think very much about that kind of question.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, what is then, as an aside? I know that you wrote this excellent essay and stuff about trade equals equality, equal inequality, but I think that you have a wider sort of vision of things as well. Do you have other ideas as well? I know that I haven't actually managed to get through yet. Do you have some kind of theory of everything in terms of creating better economy or better society?
Well, yeah, I would say that the two biggest changes we need to make, and they're both enormous, are we need to replace property with sharing, and we need to replace hierarchy with horizontalism. And I've written about those two things at great length in many essays. And I've written a few other essays as well. For instance, I wrote one essay about what it's like to hold a sign, a big sign, a protest sign by the roadside, and what kind of sign to make, and how to make it, and where to stand, and things like that. That essay was titled Honk, because part of it was about getting the cars to honk at you. So I've written a few essays about different things, like another one is called My Own Journey, which talks about, in a sort of chronological order, my own personal development, what ideas I've gone through personally. But most of my writing has been about how terrible capitalism is and what we have to do to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm delighted to see that we're kind of
working.
Go ahead.
I'm currently working on revising one of those, and I try to make some of them into leaflets so I can give them out. I can hand them to people during gatherings during local city festivals and things. I also have made some of them into videos. The videos are a pretty simple format. I read the essay aloud, and that's the soundtrack. And then for the visual part, I pick out a lot of still pictures that I have found on the web, and I put them together into a slideshow where the pictures correspond to some extent with the text that I'm reading. And I guess if I ever get popular, if any of my videos ever go viral, I could get into legal trouble because all the pictures are stolen. I mean, half of them have copyright, and some of those copyright holders may actually care about it. So I've just been stealing pictures left and right for my videos.
I think there is like they would fall under fair use policy, and also
nice.
probably the worst thing that could happen is they might want to put ads on your video. That's happened to me on a couple of videos where because I mentioned something or because I was featured something else, and I ended up with ads that are paying something else. But yeah, I think they're generally, it has to be pretty bad before they actually take the video down.
Except for Disney. Disney will track down anything that they can.
Yeah. I mean, but this is the thing that I get into trouble with a lot, with people when I'm talking about this. When people like talk about Disney and how they're trying to fucking buy up the world and all this sort of stuff, but I see it much more as as just an extension of the way we all are. There seems to be this trait or this ideology that most of us are good people, and then there's some really, really bad people, and they're trying to fuck everything up. And this is kind of seems to be the general consensus among people who are interested in creating a better world, that most of us are decent, and then there's a couple of these assholes who are trying to wreck everything. And I actually think that's a wrong way to look at it. I think that in some way that asshole is kind of in all of us. We're all a little bit like that. It's just that when you have billions and millions at your disposal, it kind of exaggerates that behavior. And there's been quite a few, plenty of studies, I think, where that shows that people become more conservative with the more wealth that they gain. And because you gain wealth gradually, if you start from humble beginnings and then you slowly make $1 million, $100 million, $1 billion, you eventually become more obsessed with the money and obsessed with making more. But actually, you're only really when you've made your first 10 billion and you're trying to make your next 10 billion, you're only really behaving the same way as when you made $10 and you're trying to make your next $10. It's the very same behavior, the very same attitude, just amplified by the effect of the money.
No, I've read that there is a difference as you get higher up in the levels of wealth. You become less needing the approval of others. You become less needing for other people to like you. Yeah. And so you start paying less attention to whether other people like you and whether you care about them. And from what I've read, the wealthier people do actually become greedier and more nasty on the average. I'm sure there are a few exceptions, but there have been some sociologists have done some studies, even on little things like an experiment with playing a game. They'd have a bunch of people playing a game, but they would have the game rigged so that one player was winning, not through any skill or any luck, but just because the game was rigged to come out in favor of that player. And they found that more often than not, the player who was winning started behaving in a more arrogant fashion. This player would start talking in a louder voice. The player would start taking more than his share of the pretzels from the snack dish that was next to the game board. It was just in all sorts of ways, this, just being nasty and gradually more and more, as though he was somehow better and more deserving than the other players.
That might be that's very good. Yes, I have read that too. But that could be at least partially explained by the fact that if you don't have much wealth, it's still very important for you to maintain good relationships with people, because you're kind of relying on people to support you in different ways, whether somebody is going to give you a job or whatever that. But I suppose as your wealth gets higher, you actually need other people less. I mean, wealth-wise, you literally need people less, because you have enough money. You don't have, and you could tell your entire family to fuck off or whatever if you want, and you're still going to have that wealth. So yeah, I suppose it's on the I've heard that like people become more sociopathic as they get up that wealth barrier. And it could be because it must be because obviously they rely on other people less, so they don't need people as much. And obviously building in confidence as well, of course, is another thing, because this is the ultimate prize of our society, really, is to have maximum wealth, is to have a really big house, to have a really fancy car and all this sort of stuff. This is status symbols of our society, and this is the stuff that we're being taught through our media, basically, is what is acceptable as success, symbols of success, etc. So I take your point. Yeah, I do. I would say that people do change over time as the wealth increases, but it could be because they're relying on other people less, or their need for other people is less. But you had a look at you were looking at the open access economy website. I mean, I don't know how much or how little you know about me, but years ago I wrote something called the Free World Charter, which is like a document of 10 principles of how society should operate, or how we should operate as individuals in society. And through that was quite popular. And through that, over years, I basically started forming this idea of what I call an open access economy, which is basically sharing goods and services, and pretty much like peer-to-peer sort of community stuff. It's all pretty obvious stuff, and it's not. I'm not really reinventing the wheel here. It's just trying to put into simple and precise terms what sort of a sharing economy could look like. What did you think of that idea? Did you have a look over it?
I only got through a little of it, and it looked a lot like resource-based economics. It looked a lot like certain kinds of communism, which I'm in favor of, by the way, even though that word has become a taboo word in certain parts of our society. Again, I would say certain kinds of communism. I'm not in favor of dictatorship, but not all kinds of communism are dictatorship. I guess you might describe me as an anarcho-communist, which is a phrase that most people in our society do not understand at all. They think anarchism means chaos, disorder, and destruction, which it does not. It just means get rid of hierarchy and have people on a horizontal level instead. And they think that communism means dictatorship, which it does not, even though there have been some governments that have called themselves communists that have been dictatorships. Communism just means sharing. So I'm in favor of sharing and without hierarchy, or as Robert Fulghum would have said, share and don't hit. Robert Fulghum, the essay, Everything I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Did you ever read that?
No, never heard of it.
Well, it's a cute little essay. I'll have to send you the link for it. He talks about the most important things we ought to do are things we learned in our first year in school, which were share with the other kids, don't hit them, don't yell, be nice, all that stuff. And that's what we ought to do. It's funny that when you get to be a grown-up, you're told not to share, but sharing is what you were told at the beginning of school. And but I was going to say, the thing that most people don't understand about anarchy and communism, I said that those can be good things, but that most people seem to think that communism means dictatorship and anarchy means complete disorder. And those are opposites. Complete disorder and dictatorship are kind of opposites. And yet when I call myself an anarcho-communist, they would say, oh, he's in favor of dictatorship and complete disorder. It's an oxymoron. I don't know.
One of the that's fascinating. One of the things that I'm also quite I'm going to say passionate, but not passionate isn't really the word, but something that I'm very enthusiastic about is how we choose the words that we choose, because I think it's like really, really important. Like if you go around telling people you're an anarcho-communist, I mean, people are probably think you're a fucking terrorist or you're going to do something awful. And that's really, that's the scale of it. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why that's happened. Obviously, mainstream media, they always tout anarchists, as the guys who are throwing petrol bombs at the police. These are the anarchists, so they're always super violent. And the communists, of course, is communist China and everything that's bad about the world, basically. So, I mean, it's almost to the point where to even use the expression anarcho-communism becomes self-defeating. That you're actually.
I don't use it very often.
Yeah, and I know you had said actually about. I got a couple of things to say to you here. You had said earlier to me about how you thought the idea of open access was really just referring to sharing, and I absolutely agree with that. And but the reason
Go ahead.
The reason that I opted for that sort of terminology was because in some circles, the idea of sharing is kind of seen as some sort of really quite a facile sort of hippie type behavior, whereas if we talk about peer-to-peer or open access to scientific papers, for example, which is a very serious movement among peer journals and stuff like that now, peer-reviewed journals, where we have this open access to scientific and scholarly documents. So that is why what I wanted to do was basically piggyback on that and say, well, look, let's call this sharing economy that I have in my mind, let's call it an open access economy, because that's basically on the same principles as the open access movement. And also on the other side of the things, the term sharing economy, which would seem to be the most obvious term to use, has actually been hijacked by quite a few well-meaning groups to not mean actual sharing, but to mean kind of companies collaborating together to profit togetger. You know, so this sharing economy term is kind of toxic as well. So you have to. It's a minefield out there, really, you know, terminology-wise. And so I hovered on open access economy because I thought it was the least bad sort of option, you know.
The word term sharing economy has also been taken for companies like Uber, where different people are all using the same car, but it's still a business. It's not actual sharing. But no, I still feel inclined to stick with the word sharing. I mean, open access sounds more sophisticated, but I think it also is more obscure. And I don't know, it's six of one and half a dozen of the other. So one term is going to alienate some people, and another term is going to alienate other people. And here in the United States, you know, the military branch of the government is called the Department of Defense, and what they're doing is not defense. It used to be called the Department of War, but they renamed it to Department of Defense. They didn't change what it does. I don't know what it's called in. Let's see. Ireland is still part of Great Britain. Yeah. So
no, Ireland is independent, but they call it the same thing. Yeah, it's called the Department of Defense. Yeah, it's the same thing here. Yeah. And I think that I think a lot of this sort of the terminology and stuff that governments use is extremely deliberate, because you have to imagine that these guys, but they have roomfuls of PR gurus who are basically operating the words and that the stuff that comes out of government. And I think that's really important. I mean, in Ireland, Ireland's a kind of a small, funny country, but it's really obvious what goes on. You know, when you see a politician who's opening up a creche or something like that, or he's got a baby, holding a baby or something like that, and they try vainly to make it look like some kind of spontaneous event, you know, but it never is, of course, you know. And when you break it down, you always think, well, all these sort of political events, they're all really highly orchestrated and planned, meticulously planned, and the wording and the speeches, the words that they use, you know, it's so. I just think that the words that people choose are so important, because that's really how we get our information mostly. And politicians, above all people, they know this so well, how you basically control people with words, and picking your words wisely can literally change the world. Literally change the world. I want to say, just one other last question. You're obviously then you're promoting the idea that trade equals inequality, and I agree with that. And you think people
not equals, but causes
causes inequality. Yes, okay, true. And obviously, I concur with that, and I think we should be sharing. How do you find? What sort of reaction do you get from people? Let's call them normal people. What sort of reaction do you get when you propose that we shouldn't be trading?
Most people just don't really pick up on that. They listen to a little of what I have to say, and then they say something like, "Oh, didn't Marx say that?" And as far as I know, he didn't, but I haven't read Marx. Marx is too long and complicated. My idea was short and simple. And some of them say, "Oh, that sounds like Jesus," and they don't expect to change any, though, because Jesus was back then and this is now. No, they don't seem to pick up on the idea that I'm advocating making the biggest change in 12,000 years. And if I actually say I'm talking about the biggest change in 12,000 years, at that point they stop listening altogether. I don't know. It's just, it doesn't catch on. It doesn't sink in. They don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the universal reaction. I think we're really are primed to believe that trade is a force for good, that trade is innocuous at worst, and but it isn't, you know. And I and many other people have intuitively believed that it isn't, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to make that computer model, was to try and find some way to prove that it isn't. And it's actually quite easy to prove, it turns out, you know, that basically it creates this inequality. And
well, part of the problem, though, is you chose a particular model when you did that simulation, and people will look at that and they'll say, "Oh, that isn't really what trade is like. The real world isn't that simple, and it doesn't work quite like that." And there's no way you can come up with a model simple enough to do a computer simulation that still reflects the real world accurately. And so it's partly a matter of whether or not you believe that your model is accurately mimicking the most important features of the real world. You take the game Monopoly.
mm-hmm.
The game Monopoly always ends with all the players but one totally impoverished. And I think that happens to be a good model of how the real world economy works, but most people just don't associate it with the real world. They don't stop and think, "Oh, the real world is like that." They just
Exactly. Yeah.
Even though actually, you know, the game Monopoly was created to teach about the real world. Do you know that?
Yes, I heard that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I often say to people is, you know, that have you ever wondered why a Monopoly game ends? You know, and no one ever seems to figure that out, because you would think that a game of Monopoly could go on and on and on forever. You know, you could just keep playing it until you get fed up with it, and that's what we're kind of led to believe. But actually, it does end, and there's a reason that it ends, and it's not because of anyone's great skill or great luck. It's literally that when you're going in with that model will bring you that result.
And you see something similar in the Great Depression, or maybe in the depression we're heading into now, where you have a few people having all the wealth and everybody else having too little wealth. And so the people with too little wealth can't buy the products, can't buy the goods, and so the whole economy stops. And
yeah,
so
actually, yes. That was something I wanted to actually, I meant to pick up on you there earlier at the beginning when we were talking about the bicycle analogy,
yeah.
which is kind of, it's a wonderful way to describe it. But of course, we mustn't forget that when we're talking about trading, we're talking about like really essential items. We're talking about people's homes. We're talking about the food that people buy, the cars that they have, whatever utilities or things that they need to functionally operate in society. Those are the things, not the bicycle, which is just a kind of a frivolous luxury for whatever. But there's the essential stuff, the electricity, the internet, the water, all that stuff is basically, this is what's at stake here in this rigged system, basically, where people are just gaining and people are losing on the one hand. And that's really important to I think to stress. We're not talking about trading as in a kind of friendly trading, where we're just casually swapping my cup for your saucer or whatever, but real stuff that people need and that is essential to life. And that's the stuff that is actually being gambled with in this big giant casino that we call our economy, and that almost none of us are winning from.
Yeah.
Okay, listen, I think we've covered everything, Eric. Have you got you have a website, I believe, don't you? Maybe I can put the link to your website earlier. What is your website?
Oh, leftymathprof.org. That comes from the fact that my name is impossible to spell. And so I'm a politically on the left, and I'm a retired mathematics professor. So when I was getting ready to retire and I didn't want my university associated with my politics, so I came up with Lefty Math Prof as a description of myself. And I used that for my email and my website and my Twitter address. And for a while I was using it for my Facebook address. So anyway, my website with my blog, my writings is at leftymathprof.org.
Fantastic. I'll put the link down in the description. Look, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you today. I know it was at short notice. I'm really happy to do that. And of course, we live streamed it, which you weren't expecting as well. So I'm really happy that you joined me today. And to be honest, I'm really happy to have met you, because sometimes I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, because I'm the guy who's basically saying that trade is not a force for good, that trade is something that we have to stop doing. And most people that I'm dealing with don't even seem to get that far. So really, really happy to meet you. And I'm delighted that I think you introduced me to the work of Bruce Boghosian, whose stuff I will link below as well.
Oh, I should mention, it's not just him. He mentions in his article or his articles other people who have been doing related research. So there are a fair number of other people who have been working along similar lines.
Brilliant. I would really hope to think that this could be like a watershed moment in history where we're actually suddenly, it's being, there's like the E equals MC squared moment, where basically we're actually starting to see the how something works in a way that we've never really understood it before. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that things will escalate from that moment. Thanks a million, Eric, for talking to me today. And
thank you.
Let's do it again sometime. Really happy, nice to meet you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for me, guys. Thanks a million for sticking around. He's a really fascinating guy, Eric. I hope to speak to him again, and it's great to meet someone on like mind in that regard. Yep, that's it for me. Like I say, I did mention before that I was doing videos once a week, and I've kind of scaled that right back down now because of the summertime, and also I want to concentrate on doing better videos, and they take longer to do. But do stick around, stick on the channel, and hope to give you some really good stuff lately soon. Okay, thanks a lot, guys, and see you next time. Bye bye.